Chapter 201. Void Summon Part 1. Northern stood aloof for a couple of seconds. He was taken adrift by the question, given his state. He just naturally froze with no answer. Then he blinked and stuttered to life with a few words. I'm fine. Don't worry. I just need to do something. Raven tilted her head. You forgot something? No. Then, what could you possibly need to do around here? Has it even been a month since you came out of the rift? Northern jerked back his head with a slight frown. I don't like what you are insinuating. What are you getting at? She sighed and shook her head with a slight shrugging of her hands. Nothing, it's fine, North. What do you need to do? He turned his head to the side and muttered. Relief. Ha! Raven at first did not hear, which caused her to almost lean her head towards him. Northern responded sharply with a flustered look on his face. I need to relieve myself. Ah! Her eyes rolled down on him. Northern's brows furrowed into a grim frown. He did not like that look at all. What? What was that for? Nothing at all. Take your precious time. But know that time is not precious. Whatever. Northern threw his head arrogantly away from her and walked deeper into the forest. He made sure he walked so deep that the trees and large leaves were blocking them from seeing him. Then he crouched somewhere, pretending to really be letting out some poop. He closed his eyes and dove into the embrace of his soul. Opening them, the scenery before him changed. Ah! It's been forever since I've been here. His voice echoed through the vast hollowness of the dark palace. As usual, the black flames were ever burning, and his intimidating seat stood like a legendary tower behind the dancing plumes of flames. As much as Northern wanted to continue admiring this visage, he needed to end matters as fast as he could. And so he called out, Come, dark terror. From the onyx ground of the palace, a flame of darkness erupted. Northern could at once feel its imposing presence. If before, dark terror's emergence had always seemed like the ignition of flames that burned with a menacing intensity. Right now, they seemed more powerful, menacing, sure, but less than they used to be. If anything, malevolent and evil were the words. Yes, very evil. And watching it made his skin rise with goosebumps. Northern swallowed his dry spit. Wait, I thought it is yet to evolve. It was exactly so. Northern looked down at the panel of information that appeared before his eyes, displaying the monster's profile. And below it were a couple of words that put butterflies in his belly. Evolution is possible. Do you want to commence evolution? Felt surreal, abstract. With little to no effort, the devil was changing? Northern gulped again and nodded, internally answering. Yes. Immediately the panel disappeared. All the panels disappeared. The limitless void was suddenly shrouded by a perfect eerie silence. Despite the usual silence of this dark palace, this one felt strange and made Northern's skin crawl with cold tendrils of anticipation. Suddenly, with a loud howling of the wind, the fires from the throne seat shot forward. Instinctively, Northern jumped back, crossing his arms over his face to protect it from the surge of flames. But to his surprise, they were more cooling and soothing than heating and searing. Hesitantly, he lowered his arms. His eyes slowly met the magnifying art formed by the deluge of flames. Black flames mixed with azure hues danced like shadows of legends, encircling dark terror and filling the hall with a dark, otherworldly glamour. The entire place sparkled with blue reflections, even his face, bathing him in an ethereal glow. The flames seemed alive, twisting and writhing in an entrancing ballet, casting bewitching patterns across the walls. An aura of mystery and power radiated from the spectacle, both beautiful and fearsome, as if an ancient force had awakened from slumber. Northern found himself transfixed, caught in the hypnotic sway of the elemental dance unfolding before him. A breathtaking vision of primal energy and grace unlike anything he had witnessed before. Beautiful! He didn't know when the words fell out of his mouth. Dark terror is evolving. Dark terror's soul is embracing the emptiness. The void sibilates into the core of its soul. The void has taken root in the core of its soul. Evolution is complete. Dark Terror has become a full-fledged creature of the Void. Soul Summon. Dark Terror has become Void Summon. Night Terror. All talents, talent abilities, attributes and attributes abilities have been devolved into the essence of Void. Your pool of Void essence grows wider. The Void Summon is a complete entity from the Soul Summon. The Void Summon feels unwavering loyalty to the Void in you. The Void Summon does not need your reservoir of Void essence to manifest. The Void Summon can maintain its physical body in the limitless Void and always answer when you call. The Void Summon is not limited by distance. The limitless Void will continue to serve as a point of connection for both you and the Void Summon no matter how far apart you are. At different Void ranks, the Void Summon will awaken Void abilities. This ability is more relevant to the true nature of the summons when they were soul summons. As long as the Void Summon is within the limitless Void, it can regenerate. Note: the Void Summon can be destroyed. Congratulations! Name: Night Terror. True name: Singularity. Danger level: Devil. Void rank: Echo. Void ability: Void Flames. Soul fragments: 0/1000. Void Summon ranks: Echoes. The starting point where the connection to the Void is faint and barely noticeable. Summons at this stage can only manifest one ability of the Void. Whispers. At this Void rank, the sibilate of the Void becomes an audible whisper. Causing their proficiency to grow, they awaken a second Void ability. Veils. As the summon delves deeper into the Void, they begin to shroud themselves in veils of darkness. These creatures gain enhanced stealth and the ability to move unseen. Emanations. At this rank, the summon's connection to the Void gives them powerful authority of darkness through the Void. Their Void ability gains a unique aspect to it. Eclipses. The summon's connection to the Void reaches a new peak, overshadowing their physical form. This causes their body to evolve and take on a new form. They also awaken a third Void ability, Servant of the Void. At this rank, the Void influence over the summon is explosive. The summon awakens an ultimate Void ability. Chapter 202. Void Summon Part 2. It was a lot to take in. Northern stood motionless for a couple of seconds, watching the endless panel of information flood his vision. He was following them with his eyes, but he didn't even know where to start thinking from. First of all, this was not expected at all. When he thought of Dark Terror evolving, he thought about the Devil becoming a different danger rank. Soul Summon, Void Summon? These were all new subjects to him, and he didn't even see them coming at all. Northern inhaled deeply and sighed out all the pressure and excitement. Firstly, he looked down at his body. I can feel the increase in my Void essence. The overall stream of essence that flowed within his coreless soul seemed to have increased and widened. He could vividly detect a smoother, more fluent and rushing flow. It bolstered his muscles with a little more strength. He felt so awesome that he couldn't help but mutter, "Wow! Does this mean every time a soul summon becomes a Void Summon, all their attributes and talents are devolved into Void and increase its essence?" If so, there was no better news than this. Northern had, after all, been stuck with the issue of a limited amount of Void essence. Although it was not particularly an issue until he fought overnight. Should there be cases where he doesn't need to expend himself for a long period of time or use his abilities tremendously, he would be fine. But after that night, it bothered him silently. He couldn't absorb soul cores, but had hoped that he'd be able to do something about the soul core of the Abysmal Corpse Eater. This was why he had kept it specially for himself. Right now, though, all that didn't even matter, for a breakthrough had come to him by itself. Northern's lips spread, crawling closer to each ear to form a vicious wide grin. This is sweet. He lifted his face to look at the monster, Void Summon standing before him. Dark Night Terror was the same as it had been a couple of seconds ago. Its vicious eyes, though, gleamed with a primal evil, something that made creeps crawl over Northern's body. The red flames that oozed out of its 4 eyes hinted at a more vicious and promiscuous depth. Northern could see at a glance The creature that stood before him was a different entity. Yet, it embodied no stark difference from dark terror. But it was definitely not the same. Moreover, night terror, huh? Sure brings back a lot of memories. Northern found the new name to be very soothing, perhaps old. An old name. Ah, damn. I'm taking too long. I have to return to the surface world. He looked into Night Terror's eyes, lingered before commanding. Go into the city, protect Ellis at all costs, and make sure you are completely unseen by anyone. Also, monitor the progression of things before acting. I'd also prefer it if Ellis does not know you are protecting him. Got me? The red flames in the devil's deep eyes ignited dangerously and slowly simmered down. Then Night Terror returned into the embrace of dark flames. Northern breathed, basking in the tremendous wave of all that had just happened now. He had to appear normal no matter what, since it'd be preferable to keep them from asking any questions than they having to pry unnecessarily. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them he was back in reality. Slowly, he stood up and walked out of the forest. Done? Yes, Northern answered, fidgeting a little. Please, no more stops until we get to the Delvier. Northern narrowed his eyes slightly, piqued by the strange name she had pronounced at the end. Since she was going to explain herself, he figured there was no need to ask. But at the very least, he knew that was their destination. The cohort continued their journey. This time, however, it wasn't silent. A couple of minutes into their way, Terrence gaily approached him, putting him in the middle between her and Raven as they walked along. Northern, at first, was shocked. He looked at her with a raised brow. But the pretty oracle smiled with her eyes and then spoke. So Northern, I heard you are from the Central Plains? Since no one wants to talk and the silence is killing me, you could introduce yourself, maybe? She looked specifically at his hair. Well, there's nothing much to know about me. I live in the countryside with two mundane parents. They tried their best for me, and honestly, I think they wanted to shield me from this very life I am living. Oh, that's new. Her voice was almost stifled. Silence lingered awkwardly in the air. Then, unexpectedly, Raven's voice resounded. They were probably making the best decision for you. To be honest, I wouldn't wish for this kind of life for any of my kids. That is, if I ever have one. Northern scoffed. It's easy for you to say, you're probably one of those kids that had all the basic education about talents and rifts and how to survive in them on a platter of gold and from a young age. Raven stopped, causing the other two to abruptly stop too. She looked into Northern's eyes and said with a cold voice, Indeed, you are right. I had everything at my disposal, and the life I live now is probably a better hell. She then continued to walk away. Northern frowned as he watched her back. He didn't know why, but what she had just uttered was incredibly displeasing and, at the same time, annoying. A better hell? Just what could she have gone through to call this desolation a better hell? I bet she's sick in the head. Terrence smiled with her eyes. Oh my. I guess holding a conversation was a very bad idea. Northern glanced at her, his eyes strained with disdain. Then he continued forward, wordlessly. The three did not talk again until they got out of the forest. Chapter 203. Across the River Part 1. Two distinct lands were cut in half by a raging river. On one side of the river was a verdant valley that gave way to a vast expanse of greenery, with towering trees whose majestic forms almost pierced the clouds. Crossing the river with the cold, biting wind, one would come to see an equally vast, desolate expanse. The lush greenery on one side of the river faded into an arid, sun-scorched plain devoid of life. The brilliant green that reigned on one side had been replaced by a harsh, bleached-out haze that hung heavy over the barren landscape. In the midst of this forsaken landscape stood an imposing sand tower, seemingly sculpted by the formidable strength of relentless winds over countless eons. The monolithic structure pierced the heavens like a colossal thorn. No life stirred in this barren landscape. The only movement came from the ever-present winds that howled across the dunes, carrying stinging particles of sand that scoured any exposed surface. The sense of desolation and emptiness was palpable, as if the land itself had been cursed and drained of all vitality. At the edge of the green valley, 3 individuals could be seen standing with contemplative looks on their faces. One was a black-haired lady with red eyes, donned in black lithe armor, her gaze coldly overlaid on the expanse before them. Behind her cold front, a slight trepidation could be discerned upon closer inspection. The second individual was a white-haired male, his hair disheveled and his thoughts seemingly scattered. His white clothes of armor would have glistened if he had done the laundry when he should have, but currently, he looked like a battered hero, one who was lost and forgotten, a wanderer on an odyssey finding his way home. The last person, standing slightly behind the boy, was the most pristine of them all. A young white-haired lady with golden eyes that seemed to reflect the distant day star, her face contorted with heavy and strained lines of worry. She was donned in a body armor that clung tightly to her skin, accentuating the subtle curves flanking her sides. Pausing for a moment, she glanced at the black-haired lady standing slightly to the front and asked, "Light, did you have something planned for this particular occasion?" Raven turned her head and nodded with a confident look in her eyes. Immediately, Terrence touched her chest and let out a sigh of relief. "Phew, I almost thought you were about to be crazy again." With a frown etched across his face, Northern interrupted. "At least let her speak of this something she has planned." Raven looked at him, then turned her gaze to the river. "It's simple," she stated, stretching her hand out over the water. "We will swim to the other side." Terrence's eyes grew wider with each passing millisecond. "Wait, what?" "Light, we can't swim across this river. You know it'll be brimming with monsters." Raven turned her eyes to Terrence, a glint of determined seriousness igniting within their depths. "Don't worry, I will protect you." At this point, Northern didn't further confirmation. "She's crazy." "Yeah, I think she's just mentally sick," he thought to himself, smacking his lips and looking irritatedly at her before shifting his gaze to the river. "Damn, do I even still remember how to swim?" Indeed, Northern had learned how to swim when he was human, but even before his death, he hadn't swum in a long time. Now, in this new life, the prospect of swimming in a raging river, one likely infested with various kinds of monsters, seemed daunting. Would it even be possible? Northern momentarily contemplated turning back and heading to the capital instead. But he quickly shook his head. The ship was more important. "This is crazy." "Well, I've seen worse, so it should be nothing, right?" he mused, trying to bolster his resolve. However, he knew deep down that it wouldn't be any less harrowing just because he had experienced his own personal hell. All hells hurt differently. Hell in the depths of a river was definitely bound to have a different feel from the hell on the surface of a blood-soaked ground. But he wasn't without a plan. A small wide grin parted his lips. "I have to give a special thanks to Hao when I see him." He threw a strained glare into the river, then looked at Raven one last time and said, "You know, you are one very stupid girl." And with that, he jumped. As Northern launched himself into the river, the cold water engulfed him, instantly sending shivers down his spine. The currents were strong and fierce, tugging at his body and threatening to sweep him away. Northern at first felt it very hard, surviving and fighting against the tumultuous waves of water. However, it suddenly began to feel less burdensome. And then a panel appeared before him. Charm ability. Breath of the Seas has been activated. You can breathe comfortably in water. Northern dove into the depth of the river and drew a long, comfortable breath. His lungs felt cold, but breathing was not strained. It was quite amazing how an item could make it so that he could breathe underwater. Very impossible, drawing another breath, he swam forward. Raven looked at Terrence and held out her hand. With a slight hesitation, the beautiful oracle held Raven's hand, allowing herself to be swept into her embrace in a swift motion. Raven smiled and said, "Hold on tight." Immediately, she followed suit, diving into the river with a grace that spoke of her familiarity with such perilous situations. Despite clasping Terrence tightly in her arms, she swam with purpose, cutting through the water like a knife, her eyes focused on the opposite shore. The weight of responsibility and determination she had shown just now seemed to radiate from her as she forged ahead. Of course, compared to the both of them, Northern found it way easier to cross and was already ahead. So far so good, there was no peril in their journey, and honestly he just wished that things would end that way. Ah, crap. I feel like I just jinxed. Northern gritted his teeth in irritation. He was beginning to feel very uncomfortable. Perhaps it would have been better if it never crossed his mind that they should cross without being attacked by any monster. But the shore was getting closer with each stroke of his hands. So maybe he would get to the shore before anything serious happened. However, just as that thought crossed his head, Northern heard a loud shriek from behind him. A pale and fake smile graced his lips. Yeah, I know, right? Chapter 204. Across the River Part 2. With Terence tightly clinging to her, Raven swam across the river, her muscles strained with just a few efforts of strokes, but she didn't care. Her eyes were brimming with a frightening resolve as she pressed on despite the slow momentum she was keeping. Compared to her, the white-haired boy was finding it quite easy to swim. She smiled for a moment and thought, he's full of surprises. No doubt Northern had proven himself to be just the way she portrayed him to be. A strong drifter hiding his power. I wonder what his talent is. Just in that moment as she sank into her mind a bit deeper, she suddenly felt a restraint in her movement, particularly one of her legs. Her eyes widened with dread, and she immediately applied more force to hijack her leg out of whatever had held it. As she tried to, Terence suddenly let out a wide scream that caused Raven's eyes to widen even more. Immediately, she dove under the water to see what was wrong, and in that instance she caught a glimpse of it. Most of its features were obscured by the fog within the depth of the water, but she could tell with those colossal eyes glaring into her soul. She gritted her teeth and pulled out from her waist belt a curved dagger like the fang of some monster she had slain. With a swift curve of her hand, she slashed the tentacles holding onto her leg, causing it to explode clouds of gore in the water and convulse on its way to the depth. Quickly, she grabbed the sinking Terence's waist and swam to the surface of the water. By the time she got to the surface, Terence was out of it. Her golden eyeballs were completely gone, nowhere to be found. Raven looked at her and gritted her teeth. Damn it, not now. As she tried to swim further, Northern approached her. Before he could say anything, she spoke. Please safely help Terence to the shore. I'll hold this for as long as I can. You'll fight underwater? Raven smiled a little bit, but Northern could see its insincerity. This thing is actually an old foe of mine. Who knows, maybe I'd be able to defeat it today, she said. Northern looked at her with a wistful expression on his face and took Terence, whom he found her state to be quite strange. What the hell? Who passes out in the middle of a river? Without a word, Northern held tightly onto Terence, flushed a little by the fact that he had to do that by her waist. Come on. This is a serious situation. He stiffened himself up and began to swim away, not sparing a glance at Raven. Carrying Terence along with him cost more effort than it should. Thankfully it was just a river, one as wide as 60 meters though. But the more baffling situation was the strength and force of the waves that crushed upon him. This particularly made it very hard for him to traverse the waters quickly. Alas, after several strokes, he finally got to the shore, breathing heavily. He laid Terence to the ground. Her eyes were wide open, but her beautiful eyeballs were gone. Northern wiped the water away from his face. His hair was wet and strangely made him look more handsome than he usually would. The effect of wetness on his pale skin was quite splendid. He looked at Terence with a strained frown, then he placed a finger beneath her nose. She's still breathing. Her life did not seem to have been in any danger. But what was that scream he heard? And why was she passed out? Although he was very curious and worried about what was wrong with the beautiful oracle, at least she's safe. He turned to the river. The surface was still and serene, only the intermittent crushing of the angry waves against the water bodies. Northern let out a tired sigh and muttered, "Should I help or should I not help?" Just when he was thinking about it, the entire river seemed to shudder, and a tentacle plunged out of it, tossing into the air a lithe human-like ragdoll. Raven flew across and landed on the barren land, rolling away into the sand. Northern, with a slightly opened mouth, exchanged glances between the retreating tentacles and the battered girl that was slowly rising to her feet, albeit in serious groans. With a dazed expression, he said, "Please don't tell me you had a sensible conversation with the sea monster where it decided to let you go?" Raven stood up and was silent for a couple of seconds. She leaned on her knee while catching her breath and stood straight afterward. "I could never defeat that monster. It's a catastrophe-level maelstrom." Northern raised his chin a little bit, then belatedly acted surprised. However, Raven smiled. "I guess you have faced one yourself. Impressive." She walked forward and crouched in front of Terrence, touching her head. Northern looked down silently for a few seconds. He wanted to see her fight so badly but had missed the opportunity. What did she do? The fight ended too fast. He was so curious but didn't think he and Raven were close enough for him to be pestering her with questions. And honestly, he just wanted to keep it that way. Should a day come where he had to make a decision as to saving her or not, he never wanted to be conflicted if he decided to act in his own selfish interest. It would help a lot to keep himself reminded that this is strictly a business expedition. She looked up at Northern and politely inquired, "Can you help me place her on my back?" "Sure," he responded with a slight nod and immediately bent down. It was a little work having to carry her well and making sure he doesn't touch any places. Eventually, Terrence was on Raven's back. Raven glanced back at the river and said to Northern, "I think it will be safe for us to go farther away from the river. That monster could still be really pissed by what I did. Besides, this place is too open. It's Slorian territory, and their scouts could be lurking around." Northern nodded in consent with her words, and the two of them trekked forward on the desolate plain. Although until they got to the hill enclosure, Northern couldn't stop wondering what the hell she had done in that river. But he was more than resolved not to ask. Not just this question, every question that would portray him to look a little bit interested in her matters, he didn't want. Let's just stay out of hers so she stays out of mine. Chapter 205, Arduous Expedition Ahead. Raven gently lowered the beautiful oracle onto the stony ground in a cave. The entrance of the cave was a vast, cavernous opening that led into an underground realm of towering, twisted formations resembling tree trunks or roots, creating an intricate and almost organic-looking architecture. At the center of this subterranean marvel lay a sunken pathway, guiding them deeper into the mysteries that awaited within. Earthy tones of brown and ochre hues surrounded the terrain, giving the cavern a sense of age and antiquity. Northern stood at the entrance of the cavern with his arms folded, observing the sloppy and dark depth. The glow of the sun was slightly scorching beneath the eternal twilight. As to whether that was because of the nature of the terrain they now found themselves in or it was just the passage of time, he did not know. There were fewer trees and vegetation to absorb the heat of the daystar in this area. But the day was slowly progressing into the afternoon, so it was really tough to decide. He pushed the pointless worry behind his back as Raven stood up and laid a slightly worried gaze on Terrence. "You seem like you're used to this situation," Raven answered him, looking at Terrence. "Terrence is special. She can see things." Northern frowned a bit. "What things?" Raven finally removed her eyes from Terrence and looked at Northern. "Inhumane things." He raised a brow. "Like visions." Raven shook her head slightly. "Visions would be better." She turned to the depth of the cave and stared deep for a couple of seconds before she turned to Northern and asked, "How good are your eyes in the dark? As good as yours?" Raven shook her head slightly. "My eyes are bad in the dark." "Then do you want me to summon a source of light?" He raised one hand, ready to manifest the orb of light on his palm. "No, we'll get busted if you do that." She narrowed her eyes a little, sparing a quick glance to the depth of the cave. "This path is our chance to enter the Slorian stronghold without being discovered." "And you can't see in the dark?" Raven smiled a bit. "Since my ability has more to do with light, darkness is a really fatal weakness for me." "How ironic." considering her black hair and red eyes. How ironic, considering my black hair and red eyes, is probably what you are thinking. Northern jerked his back with a little frown. What the hell, you can read minds? No, she smiled again, but it was pale and ghostly. Everyone has the same reaction when I tell them my talent has to do with light. Ah, I see. Northern nodded. Then he leaned away from the wall and unfolded his arms. How then do you plan to pass this depth with such bad vision? Well, for one, I thought you were going to have better vision than I, considering that your eyes are blue and beautiful. Northern immediately felt something shake his entire body. Eh? No, 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 you can't fall for that. No one had ever called his eyes beautiful, but still it felt almost unpleasant, like he had just lost his place as the man. How can she even say something like that so casually? Besides, why the hell did that even touch me? Am I that lacking romantically that I'd fall for a small compliment? Come on, Northern, you're not a kid. Only at times like this does he remembers he's old. Northern furrowed his brows darkly to tell her off without necessarily saying it. Well, I do have great sight. They are nothing to boast of, though. Good. Then you'll practically be leading us through the cave, she uttered with a strange smile curled on her lips. Something did not just settle well with Northern. With an inquisitive raise of his face, he asked, How bad is your eyesight? Very bad.
I'm practically blind.
I have to rely on my sense of sound and smell. But in usual cases, all I just have to do is have a source of light around. I'll be fine. This time, however, we can't do that. We need to be stealthy about our entry. I see. His eyes grew distant as he digested all that she said. Then they suddenly narrowed. He looked at her suspiciously for a couple of beats and then asked, Wait, so you want me to believe that you cannot see at all, but will trust me to lead us into that dark tunnel? Me? Who is a stranger you just met like a week ago? Does it matter? Our interests align, and you'll do anything to protect me since you want the airship so much. That is how you will be able to return home, isn't it? Northern chuckled, almost staggering back. He nodded his head slightly. Okay, I get what you are saying, but you are being very wrong in your calculations, Raven. Seems like you have me all figured out, and that fact is very annoying. So beware. I can decide to surprise you anytime. With a barely visible smile, she nodded her head. I'll keep that in mind. She turned her gaze to Terence and brought them back to him, lingering before asking. Northern almost could tell what she wanted to say. Would you be willing to carry Terence, since you can see better? All you need to do is hold my hand and lead the way. I knew it. It was not like he could refuse anyway. The situation demanded it. But it was getting quite inconvenient. Our journey has not even started, and she's being a deadweight already. Northern walked forward and carried Terence. He didn't need help raising her to his back. He just crouched in front of her, grabbed her legs while Raven leaned her seemingly lifeless body towards his back. He adjusted the rest as he stood up. His face was getting red. Are you okay? Yes, definitely. Okay then. She stretched her hand for him to hold. Should we move then? Northern looked at the exposed hand, protruded out of the leather vambraces of her armor. They were olive and tainted with calluses. He slowly moved his hand and held them, met with a rough and hardened palm unlike what he had thought. Northern could tell she was going to be a very strong fighter. This, after all, had to be proof of so much hard work. Crap! I can't believe I'm holding a girl's hand, and another one is on my back. What am I? A babysitter? Northern smacked his teeth silently. No doubt about it, this expedition was a very bad idea. He walked forward, leading them deeper into the cave. Chapter 206. A Strange Darkness. Northern did not struggle to see at all. At first, when they started walking into the cave, he had suspected that perhaps Raven was lying. Maybe it wasn't as bad as she claimed. Because how was he supposed to believe that she made an entire plan based on a speculation that he would have great eyesight due to the beauty of his eyes? He wasn't going to buy it at all. Something had to be fishy, and so Northern pressed forward, carefully leading her with Terence on his back. But he had a feeling that he shouldn't speak. Not in this eerie darkness. He could perfectly see through with no difficulty. But there was something in the darkness of this cave that created a stark difference from the usual darkness he was used to. Even in the night, all eyes could see minute details down to dots, and without much strain. But here it was like his sight was limited. Trying to see deep into the darkness felt tumultuous, like a strong veil was blocking some distance beyond from being pierced by the prowess of his eyes. The farther he went, the farther this veil went. It was like the ratio of details he could see was limited by a certain distance. And beyond it was an impenetrable darkness, not even by his own godly eyes. It felt strange and upsetting that Northern, at a point, silently gritted his teeth. His eyes were, of course, limited by distance usually, but it was a tremendously far distance that he never thought they'd be any use to be worried about it. He could even see as far as 5 kilometers ahead. Suddenly being limited by this little darkness was disgusting and endearing. It made him sure that there was undoubtedly something about this darkness. Something he'd not mind unraveling. Should I use the unseeing eyes? He thought at some point. That was, after all, the ability of his unique eyes that could unravel the mystery of the strings that wove reality. But that, of course, would be very unwise of him. Raven was behind him and Terence was on his back. There's no telling what could happen from using an ability like that before them, most especially Raven. Northern didn't want any of his secrets spilling into her hands. Any at all. So he'd just suck it up and silently pass through this strange and difficult darkness. As they continued, another thing Northern got to discover was Raven's sincerity. At times when he was careless, thinking she'd maneuver it somehow, the young lady was like a helpless sheep, almost stumbling from stones. When it first happened, Northern had thought she was just putting in an act. But then it happened again and again. Then he began to feel like a bad person. His mind demanded several questions, most of which revolved around how senseless and disturbing he found her existence to be. She really planned her entire journey based on the things that he could do. Does she have an ability that can make her see my abilities? 'Cause, how can she be so sure? There had to be something. Northern was filled with so much confusion that he even almost faltered his steps. That was the moment he reorganized his thoughts and decided to focus on successfully traversing the darkness. After that, his thoughts were silenced. A couple of minutes later, a slight glint of light appeared afar. Immediately it came into view. He heard Raven's voice. "I can see now." "Eh? That fast?" He unknowingly blurted out his thoughts. Raven smiled. "Would you like me to keep pretending I was blind, so you can hold me a little longer?" Northern frowned, a forced smile parting his lips in the darkness. "How strange. I never knew an oddball like you had a sense of humor." "Oh, I really needed to grow one. I could just go insane in this place, you know?" She patted his shoulders and walked forward. Northern's frown deepened as he watched her go. Again, he felt like he had just been violated somewhere. "What the hell is wrong with me?" He hurried forward, his voice running ahead of him. "Hey, you better come take your girl." Raven did not stop and just trekked forward. She then stopped and raised her right hand wordlessly, causing Northern to wear caution like a robe as he slowly approached her. He whispered, "What?" "We are closer to the entrance. We have to be careful there's no scout in sight," she responded to him in a low tone. "Oh, I see." Northern nodded. Both of them stood closer to the bright entrance, drenched in grave silence. A couple of minutes later, Northern leaned his head closer to her and whispered, "I'm curious, though. You seem super cautious of these spies. This stronghold of Sloria, how special is it?" Raven looked at him, a slight show of surprise reflected on her face. "Master Annette didn't tell you about it?" Northern scrunched his entire face. No, she didn't. And the level of your specifics has me questioning why, of all people, you mentioned Instructor Annette. She is always around you? You've been watching me?" His brows were slowly closing towards one another. "Isn't that a given? I intend to need you, and I was paying a huge sum to you, even though you'd be taking a very valuable item from me." Wait. Let me get this. He chuckled a little. So you've been watching me since when? And wasn't it you who offered the airship? At this point, Northern's voice grew a bit louder. Raven immediately placed a finger on her lips, looked front, and was silent for a few seconds before she then said, "After we talked, and I said I was going to get back to you, I intentionally delayed because I wanted to have some time to see if you truly had what I needed." Northern frowned grimly. "Okay, I don't find this pleasing at all. And I didn't even know? How were you able to do it?" Raven looked at him. "The black bird." His eyes widened. "The black bird?" Northern and Raven were silent after her last statement. The bird. There had to be something to it. He wanted to know. But wasn't that just calling her to hover upon his matters? He had to be meticulous and extremely careful, should not act as a fool and give himself away any more than he probably has. Which was why he chose to stay silent and not ask anything about the bird. They had an entire expedition. There was no reason to rush. Who even knows how long they could be on this expedition? Northern breathed and looked away from her. "So, when exactly are we going to step out of this place?" Raven's statement stopped midway as she suddenly widened her eyes and swung her face to Northern's back. She suddenly threw her hand towards the person he was carrying, but before it could make it, Terrence's head was already raised. A loud, sickening shriek soared out of her mouth, filling the entire darkness with a frightening dread. And of course, announcing their presence. Chapter 207. A little humor won't hurt. With that loud shriek, the lady began to convulse, shuddering off Northern's back. He had to pay extra attention to make sure she didn't just fall off and gently managed to place her on the ground. His face was tensed as he turned to Raven, who had almost the same expression on her face, but hers was more choleric. "Please protect her. I'll be right back." Without giving Northern a second to speak, she dashed forward, speeding almost like the wind, sinking further into the now subtle darkness. Northern gritted his teeth. Damn it. How does she go ahead doing things on her own? This was the second time now, and it was beginning to piss him off. He turned to Terrence, who was still shaking tremendously. Her body was like the dislodged tail of a reptile that was throwing tantrums. Northern even had to use his hand to support her head as she almost smashed it on the wall. All of this was a new territory for him, but he was guessing Raven was used to it a lot. Northern crouched in front of her and tried to hold her to one place, placing his hand tenderly on her shoulders. A couple of minutes passed, and he didn't hear anything, not even from outside. Just as his patience was wearing thin, he began to hear footsteps, drenched in caution. He sprang to his feet and swiftly summoned the dagger, lashing out his hand as the figure reached him. But his hand stopped in the air, held by a cold grip. Raven slowly lowered his hand and smiled. "Smooth." Northern raised an eyebrow, noticing a smudge of red blood on her cheeks. He asked, "What did you do to the scouts?" She opened her mouth, lingered, then finally said, "I killed them. There was no other option." Northern's mouth fell. "Are you kidding me?" "Exactly." She curled up a corner of her lips. "I was kidding you." Then she added, "It's fun to see you act like you care. I'm curious as to what demon lay dormant in you." Odd. She was incredibly odd. Passing Northern, she knelt in front of Terrence and took her into her bosom, hugging her tightly. No matter how fierce the lady shook and trembled, Raven just took it all in, holding her tightly with her eyes closed. Northern watched this persist for a while and felt a faint heaviness weigh on his chest. He had been thinking Raven to be a manipulative fox, someone filled with stupid ideologies, a careless hero, but right now he didn't even know what to think. And strangely, he felt like the wicked and bad one in this atmosphere. Refusing to yield to the feeling, he swallowed nothing and took his eyes away. After a while, Terrence calmed down and slowly slumped, falling asleep. Northern observed with a side gaze, not wanting to show that he was paying serious attention to them. Raven stood up after the beautiful oracle had been laid on the ground and faced Northern. Northern asked in that instant, "What next? What are we doing?" Raven was silent for a bit, She looked around as she spoke. Now, we are going to disguise ourselves and enter the city. She looked at Northern and continued. These Slorians are quite unique. The first thing you might want to know about them is that they are made up of students like us. Northern's brows rose. Students like us? Yes, but much stronger. They have spent longer than we have in this place. There's even some among them that are savants and sages. Northern felt his mouth subtly drop. He might not know how long it took for one to become sages or savants, but he knew it was a lot of investment. Gilbert, who looked like he was in his late 50s after all, was still a sage. That was enough to hint at the fact that it was not an easy feat. Once one became a drifter, advancing to the next rank became 100 times harder, and most times the better way to go about it was challenging higher-tier rifts. But that particular act jeopardized the lives of drifters, because it was recorded that only 20% of masters that enter Tier 7 rifts and above end up coming alive. One needed a cohort of 8 with at least 3 masters, or in the best-case scenarios, a savant or a sage. Of course, this was even for just Tier 6 and Tier 7 rifts. The requirement for other rifts was tremendously high. Even till date, it's unknown if a Tier 9 rift is closable. Tier 8 already poses a continental destruction level of challenge. And so, the fact that they were sages who were just students like them was amazing. But what baffled Northern immediately was, why are the rifts still here then? How were they able to advance so quickly? He sort of knew the answer, but Northern was filled with curiosity. He wanted to see other people too and know how strong they are. But this is crazy. Other students are here too like us. Yes, it's crazy, right? Doesn't it make you want to question the reputation of the Central Plains Academy? Northern looked at her, then looked away. Honestly, he didn't want to have this conversation with her. But maybe her perception was just too amazing. It doesn't matter, let's leave things as they are. At the very least until I can trust her. Both of them were silent again for the next couple of seconds. Northern had actually expected that they'd start moving after she said what she said. But then she just stood there, which then prompted him to ask, "So, are we not going to go?" Raven looked at him, her expression back to stern and emotionless. Then she gave a short smile. A smile that got on Northern's nerves. Like, what is funny? Why the hell does she keep smiling? The sun is still high up. We have to wait till dusk till we move so we don't get noticed. Northern frowned slightly. I see. Then he heard her voice again. In the meantime, do you want to hear about what exactly we are going to do and why we need to steal from a sage? Chapter 208. A Talk of the Past Part 1. Of course, why would he not want to hear such an interesting talk? In fact, he had looked forward to it since she said she was going to explain it. So Northern acted cool and said to her, "If that is all right by you, please go ahead." Raven looked forward with a forlorn gaze. They were standing beside the wall. Terence was laying on the ground, and the bright entrance was a couple of meters away from them, but the darkness thickly clouded their surroundings. Then she started, "Was it 3 months ago? I guess it was 3 or 4 months ago. When we first got here, we focused all our energies on defeating monsters and taking back the Lotheloan capital. I personally felt like we needed a safe place to stay, but we were in the middle of a city teeming with monsters. It made no sense to fight our way out of it when there could be the possibility of other monsters being outside too. Instead, I proposed that we should take a chunk of the city from the monsters and build a safe home, a stronghold for ourselves. With admirable and painstaking effort, we were able to do that. We also lost a few precious people too." Northern's mouth turned bitter at the sound of her last couple of words. They somehow kept ringing in his head, reminding him that he wasn't the only one that had it tough. Meanwhile, Raven continued talking. After settling down, we slowly began to move out and clear the monsters from around us. We divided ourselves into 3 major parties led by Sage Gilbert, Master Annette, and the twins. I don't know how or why, but somehow, they were here and also originally belonged to the Central Plains. Raven looked like she wanted to say more but hesitated. After 2 or 3 seconds, her words came. We began to push the subjugation further, taking the north, west, south, and east wings. It was then we started finding survivors. Northern paid attention to her, but was sure these words were not what she had initially wanted to speak of. No doubt, Raven had exercised self-control at that point. He gets why she could be skeptical about revealing whatever was on her mind in that regard to a stranger. After all, he also was quite skeptical, but compared to her, he had enough facts to prove that their being here was Ruffsberger's ploy, and Gilbert had a strong hand in it. After survivors started coming in, we saw the need for a wide exploration and subjugation so that we can save as many people as are out there. It was during one of these subjugations that we discovered that there was a place called the Sloria Stronghold. She paused, breathed softly, and continued. Of course, the moment we heard about a place that had erected its walls in perfect defense against monsters, a discord happened, and some people wanted to move over to that place. Even I didn't think it was such a bad idea. It'd be safer there than in Lothelowin, where we were just trying to establish a stronghold. Besides, we were pretty inexperienced compared to these people. Hence, it was only natural that we all wanted to go. Northern gulped. With the darkness that shrouded their environs and the way her narration was going, it was hard not to get tense. She continued, "And so we went, that was 3 months ago. We came to Sloria. But we decided to send representatives first since we didn't know how things were, and it'd be dangerous for all of us to travel together at the same time. These representatives were to negotiate on behalf of everyone, and I was a part of them too." She paused, lingered for a second, and carried on. "We got to Sloria, through the front gate. They have a tall wooden wall built with sharp-edged logs to impede monsters should they try to tear down the walls. They have towers from which mage-class drifters discharge spells and abilities with destructive firepower. They were practically an impenetrable fortress. With what we saw, we were happy. We felt with this we would be safe, perhaps get stronger with the help of these people and start to find our way home." Northern studied her face as her words came out with a delicate serenity. But they were different. A lot of things were different. For starters, they had a very strong leader whose authority was overwhelming. Sloria might have looked like some haven to several students, but to me it was just another hellish cage. She let out a shaky breath. Well, at that time we knew little, so we went straight to their leader and spoke to him. We told him of our need for a safe place where we can get stronger and finally find a way home. Raven paused, just at the part Northern was starting to get into it. "He gave us a condition." Of course he did. Being a leader and being able to hold together such a place, making it as impenetrable as she had described, would have required some extreme and unethical measures. He wanted me to be a part of his harem. He also demanded that all the females, including Master Annette, who was with us at the time, would become his maids, and he'd take turns defiling us every night. Northern felt his viscera churn with disgust. What the hell? He indeed was expecting something extreme and unethical, but this was beyond his expectations. Northern looked at Raven's distant gaze, slowly narrowing his eyes as he was prompted to ask a question. After lingering, he asked, "So, what happened?" The answer should have been quite clear since Raven was here, and none of the females from Lothelowin were working as maids, especially not Annette. Northern tried to imagine the brute master in a maid attire. It was unfathomable. If at all any bit fathomable, then utterly disgusting. With her muscles, wearing a maid dress was unsettling. It did look like it'd suit Raven more, though. His train of thought was interrupted by her slow and petrifying response. She looked at Northern, took her time, then said, "Well, I accepted to be his wife." Her gaze grew distant again as her voice trailed off. "Well, I was, for a while. Then I tried to kill him." She concluded her statement with a pale, wistful smile. Chapter 209. A Talk of the Past, Part 2. Northern was not sure what he had just heard now, but he was also sure he had not mistaken it. "Wait, you did what? You married? And at such a young age? Wait, is she even young? Or was he just projecting his own guess of what her age should be on her?" Suddenly, he felt the urge to know. But that urge came with a lot of discomforting feeling. Sometimes, being in the body of a child, having to live as one and faced with the harrowing experience of this life, Northern often forgot he was Elliot or had been before. It was easier to just live life letting go of that past. And honestly, it was so tempting. He was doing it without realizing. Still, there was a degree to which he could get shameless. So this was one of those times he decided to exercise caution and not ask for a lady's age. I failed though. I was not able to kill him. Of course you weren't. If you were, we wouldn't be here right now. Northern's voice hushed. Then his eyes slowly widened as a realization settled in. Wait, don't tell me. The sage we are going to steal from is the leader of this stronghold whom you tried to kill. Raven looked at him indifferently, not answering until after a couple of seconds. She shook her head and said, No, Northern, the leader. He is more powerful. I'm not sure of his rank, but I'm sure he's more powerful than a sage. Perhaps a grand savant. Northern froze, his eyes and brows widened. Then he leaned closer, trying his best to stifle the stunned shock in his voice. You tried to kill an ephemeral rank drifter? It was unbelievable. These were beings that at this stage began to transcend common sense, mortal limitations. Becoming a master was impressive, something noteworthy. It served as a core beginning of one's journey as a powerful drifter, but it could also serve as the end. This all were dependent on an individual's resolve and the resources available to them. It was why great clans and kingdoms often claimed territorial rifts. Becoming a sage was another checkpoint. The moment a drifter became a sage, it is said that their soul core is restructured. Their soul is renewed, and its tendrils stretch deeper, touching the foundation of true souls' constellations. Now, this was a realm of knowing that Northern wasn't all too familiar with. Of what he knew about constellations, it was the fact that months were named after them. And some people actually worshipped them. His own mother was an example. Her belief in Eldek was so strong that sometimes he questioned if this Eldek was actually a person. But no, Eldek is just a soul constellation, one of the early existences that somehow hold the strings of the entire world together in a profound and complicated manner. A sage grows a connection to the true soul, and this alone places them on a different pedestal. To simply put, their souls have transcended mortality. And then there were Grandsavants, the ephemeral rank. This could just be referred to as a champion of the world. Their soul form becomes malleable and susceptible to constellation forms. This causes them to be able to wield a new set of powers called stellar authority. It goes deeper than that, and seems to even permit body transformation. Northern was not sure, but at least he was sure Raven knew better. She must have undoubtedly known how strong her opponent was, and yet she tried to kill him? I'm still going to kill him again. She paused, taking in a couple of breaths before she added, But not now. Northern observed her obstinate and resolved face. It brimmed with the kind of light he'd tag as trouble. What he saw in the depths of her crimson gaze was nothing other than destruction waiting to befall his future. Although he had to check himself if he was just being a wuss and a coward, but at the same time he also thought Raven was a delusional person. But the scary thing about her kind of delusional person was, in her eyes burned a strange and vicious flame of resolve to mold those delusions into reality. It was another level of Delulu entirely, and what truly frightened Northern were those eyes. Because of that look in her eyes, he could not casually say she's going to learn her lesson and soon know her place. I mean, she has tried to kill him once already. So many questions rose in Northern's mind about the event. There was just so much he'd love to ask her. How did she escape? How did she even plot it out? Why did she fail? Did she really marry him? Did she climb onto his bed? How old is she? What rank was she when all these happened? So many questions, but instead of asking them, he silently studied Raven's seemingly lost stare. Then he asked, So how does this relate to the sage we are trying to steal from? Raven's brow subtly frowned. In fact, it looked like she was holding that frown back. Well, I became a criminal, like a very important one, because he was saving me for the last, and he insisted on having me even though things got so dire. He was going to violate me in the most vicious of ways. I was in a pinch. That was when I met Helena. She looked at Northern, then continued, Helena was a huntress, and she lived solo in the stronghold. No one disturbed her, so it was quite easy for her to help me and be arrogant about it. Northern looked at her with more interest. Was it because she's a sage? Raven nodded. Yes, and apparently she and their leader Afghan used to have some sort of history. Both of them are the strongest drifters in the stronghold. And I can basically say they are the reason why the Sloria stronghold is even standing in the first place. She paused. Northern carefully observed her as she took shaky breaths, clenching her fist. She was trying her hardest not to allow the rage that burned within her to spill out to her surroundings. And she was managing well. She breathed in and out, then said, "It made it even more difficult for me to understand why they have decided to stay caged instead of fighting for their freedom. Why will anyone choose to be captive in their own lands?" Her words carried a heavy weight. Northern could almost sense personal feelings mixing up with them. Even though she had tried to calm herself down just now, it must mean this part goes a lot deeper for her than he could understand. And to be honest, he didn't want to understand. He didn't want to know what kind of prison hell she had lived to have a problem with people deciding to live rather than to die. He didn't care, and he never wants to pity her. Chapter 210, Talent Geek. Helena protected me for a couple of days, but she also made it clear to me that I couldn't continue to stay under her shelter. The moment Afghan was sure that I'm with her, he'd stomp to her place, and she could not win him in a fight. She could never. Raven breathed. During my short stay with Helena was when I saw it, a map of the entire continent of Stelia. Northern narrowed his eyes. What we are going to steal is a map. All that life-endangering situation we would be putting ourselves in, and it's just a map. Raven gave him a prolonged, cold gaze. Then she responded, "It's not just a map. It's a map of the entire continent of Stelia. Having that map means we know exactly where we are going. Haven't you thought about how exactly you are going to make your way out of this continent?" "Oh!" Northern's mouth froze for a moment. "That's true," he muttered in shame. After a few seconds, he then said with a strained voice, "But still, fighting a sage because of a map?" He contorted his mouth like he was biting on something bitter. The thought of what they were going to do tasted very bitter in his mouth. He felt like the prize was too little for such extreme actions. "Who said we'll be fighting? Do you intend to fight a sage? Can you guarantee going out of it alive?" Her words reached him like the sharp edge of a knife. Northern's brows stayed furrowed for a couple of seconds before he retorted, "How exactly are we supposed to steal from a sage without considering the thought of fighting them?" Raven chuckled lightly. The chuckle was more of a mockery, and it irked Northern because what had he said that was funny? Oblivious to whatever was going through his mind. Raven slowly sat on the ground and folded her legs. "Well, if worse comes to worst, I will do the fighting. It is always kind of rough for one to know the difference in power levels when they are just a drifter. The moment you become a master, you'll be able to comprehend things on a whole other level." A small smile left her face. "No matter how strong you are right now, no matter how promising your abilities are, you are limited by the fact that you are not a master." Northern frowned a little. "And you are." Of course, he knew better than anyone that she was. He just wanted to check if she would hide the fact. "Yes, I am. And it is why I can tell you that even if I fight with Helena, I cannot win." Northern thought she was done talking, but she looked at Northern, staring deep for a couple of seconds, and uttered in addition, "I have an EX-class talent and an abyssal rank attribute. As a master, I'm stronger than 50% of the masters out there, and I tell you, I don't think I'll be able to leave as much as a scratch on her." Northern was silent for a few seconds. Then he looked at her and asked, "Is that the same with Sage Gilbert?" Raven lingered before she responded. "Well, there are a lot of things that come together to form how hard a drifter could be to deal with. The talent, attributes, and most importantly, how the drifter puts all these factors together to properly maximize the potential of their abilities. Trust me, I have seen drifters, masters, savants, and sages with amazing talents but with poor mastery and application. It often saddens me at times." Her expression, in fact, almost grew a tad bit somber. "Because it takes deep and careful use of these talent abilities to maximize one's strength. Battles just aren't about bludgeoning into a fight like a brainless body of horns and power. Drifters can be bad matchups for each other, and it's even possible for a master to beat a sage. It all depends on the circumstances of the fight and how the master uses their abilities. What are the pros and cons they consider? What about the environment? Does it permit them to be versatile with talent application? All these things are very crucial to the Akrap. What the hell is this? Northern thought as her voice trailed off. Of course, her words were making sense, but she just kept going and going about talents and what they could best be used for, how to apply this and that, and blah 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 blah. Two most petrifying facts, however, were 1. Raven had just spat out her talent class and attribute rank just like that. Northern didn't know how much she knew about him, but he was sure she only knew what everyone knew, but perhaps a little bit deeper. What worried him, however, is if she knows a thing or two about his connection to Dark Terror. Night Terror. 2. Her expression as she spoke about talent was unusual, confusing, and made Northern shiver with goosebumps. Her face was glowing with beautiful sparkles of excitement. She wasn't smiling or particularly giving any emotion, but in her voice, in her hand gestures, Northern could tell and feel the excitement she was speaking with. Ah, this one is a talent nerd, I guess. Having enough of all the talk, Northern sighed. Immediately, she regained herself and slightly opened her mouth.
I'm sorry. I diverted.
Northern nodded tiredly. Yes, you did, but it's okay. You just really love talking about talents. Raven closed her eyes peacefully for a second and said as she opened them, Yes. I grew up surrounded by people with amazing talents and a frightening potential and passion for growth. I think I must have just grown into being this kind of person. She looked at Northern. What about you? And asked. The white-haired boy looked away with a crumpled face. I'm not sure we are close enough for me to share the circumstances of my childhood growth. The air between the two of them was silent and awkward for a bit. Then Raven's voice slickly cut through. Okay, the point I was trying to make was if I play my cards right, it's possible to defeat Sage Gilbert. But Helena is different. Her talent is unfair to her opponents. All I'll be doing is holding her back a little until you get the job done. I see. Wait, what? Chapter 211, You lack passion. I'm sorry, what did you say now? Until I get the job done? What job? Raven smiled. It's simple. Should things go south? No south, you will have to steal the map alone while I stall the Desert Huntress until you are done. Northern frowned darkly. And if you're leading me into a trap? What if this was your plan, to trick me and use me to fulfill your own goal? Or do you think I've not noticed how manipulative and smart you are being with me? Raven looked at him seriously. I'm not being manipulative. I'm not even being overly smart. When you have lived around dangerous people all your life, this is how you would be. In your case, I think worse. She paused and continued after sighing. Use you. This is too small and menial of a thing to use an amazing resource like you for. I can even do it myself should you decide not to. But with the two of us, it will be better. We still have to face a monster, remember? And the expedition is not going to be a walk in the park either. I just think we need to save as much health as we can by best utilizing each other. She was silent for a while, then her voice came again. This time, cold. Besides Northern, aren't both of us using each other here? Not to even say, you receive more of the benefit in this fight than Terrence and I do. Northern withdrew a little, momentarily averting his eyes. Then he shot them at her. You agreed to it, didn't you? Yes, I did. Then why are you complaining now? I'm not complaining, Northern. I'm just saying, you can't receive that enormous reward and not want to put in your own quota of work for this to be successful. Besides, I'm not even asking you to fight Helena. Northern was silent for a while, looking down. Or would you like to fight Helena? Locating and stealing the map is a much better option, but should you want to fight Helena, she's all yours. Don't just die. He frowned at her. What's your deal if I die? This expedition cannot be successful if you do. His frown got deeper. He looked down at her, silent for a few moments, then his voice ushered out, pitch climbing higher than usual. What is it? What is it exactly that you need from me and can't get from other drifters? I'm sure it would have been very easy and possible for you to coerce the ice guy into following you on this expedition. Those are actual powerful dudes, you know. Compared to them, I'm not all that, you know. Raven looked at him and scoffed. Are you trying to mislead me from the fact that you are strong? Northern was frozen for a bit and cursed internally. What the hell? His advances were to dig out Raven's intent, of course. To himself, he meant it when he said he wasn't all that. But that didn't mean he didn't know of his potential to surpass each and every single one of them. However, the problem that even Northern didn't know he had was that he was taking this overwhelming potential too lightly, and Raven could see it. How she could, however, remained a mystery. Perhaps she was taking him on this journey to do what she did with other party leaders, bringing out the strength in them. Perhaps she just truly needed him as much. Northern, of course, didn't chart the course of his thoughts to these paths, not at all. In fact, he couldn't read anything at all in Raven's words and actions. They were compelling him to believe and trust her. And he was barely just holding on due to his cynical view of everything, including her. Most especially her. Raven's voice trailed into his ears. I think you are selling yourself too short. I don't know if you are doing it to hide. What is it you are hiding, though? Your strength? Your weakness? How are you ever going to grow if you hide everything? Or are you just a coward? Her words were like sharp knives, cutting into his skin. But Northern kept a firm and unbroken gaze, clearly getting offended by the things she was saying. When did the conversation become about him? This fox. Raven finally raised her head and looked at him. You are strong. Far stronger than everyone I have ever seen. Maybe if it's you. Her gaze drew distant lines, appearing down and somber. Then her voice also became low. Maybe if it's you, it will be possible. It? What? What will be possible? Northern asked, glaring at her. She smiled with her eyes and looked warmly into his. Immediately, Northern was taken aback, eyes widening. She was awful. Damn it. He cursed and gritted his teeth. Northern, I sincerely need you. I need you so I can free myself from my own hell. And in order for that to happen, you have to be stronger. You have potential, but you lack passion. You have to be very stronger, not just in potential, but actually strong. This expedition could be all you need for that to happen. Northern stared at her. A mixture of ambiguity and annoyance etched across his facial features. Her statement annoyed him so much. He was incredibly strong and didn't need anyone telling him what to do. That's how he felt. But also, at the same time, some truth in Raven's words continued to ring within him. Moreover, the embarrassment handed to him by the sage had become one hell of a harrowing memory. Even though he was so strong, he could cause an entire existence to disappear without a trace. Even though he was so strong that his soul conformed to no laws and concepts, he still felt weak before a sage. A sage was a lot, but Northern felt he should have done better. And just as he had been reassessing himself since the incident, Raven's words once again brought to his face the fact that he had been too complacent and stupid, and he wanted to change. He wanted to be really strong. He didn't just want to survive, tossed by every direction of the tide, desperately clinging onto the server board. He wanted to ride the wave, direct the tide, and stand upon it like a stalwart surfer. He gritted his teeth slightly and looked away from her. Still, it's very unsettling and annoying that she is saying this to me, Northern complained internally. He was still going to keep his cynical view about her. But maybe it was time to sincerely begin to check himself. And truly ask, what had all those dayless nights in the rift been for? What was to show for all his sufferings? Akhap, I feel so disgusted. Chapter 212, Void Lord. Northern leaned against the wall and silently watched the far entrance. The only source of light that was more than enough for Raven with her night blindness to see. He got curious about her ability for a minute, tried to think about what exactly it'd have to do with light. But since he didn't want to pry and wouldn't want her to also, he once again killed the thought. It was better to just discover things his own way. Another thing that greatly bothered him were the things Raven said. Northern, I sincerely need you. I need you so I can free myself from my own hell. And in order for that to happen, you have to be stronger. You have potential, but you lack passion. You have to be very strong. Not just in potential, but actually strong. This expedition could be all you need for that to happen. And what exactly did she mean by, I need you so I can free myself from my own hell? Northern shook his head and glanced at her. She was seated on the ground, her legs crossed and her eyes closed, as though she was in a deep meditation session. Since there was nothing to do at the moment, Northern summoned his profile to check things out. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, nameless. Attributes, formless, spawn of void, limitless void, vestige of chaos and void. All eyes, chaos thread, flames of chaos. Soul rank, drifter. Void summons, 1/100. Talent fragments, 288/2000. Copied talents, 1/2. Own talents, 1. Attribute abilities, active/passive. September 10th. Owned items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Silver Sword, Death Glare, and 5 others. There's no much diff. Wait a minute. What's that? Void summons, 1/100. Does this mean I can create 99 more of those? Northern paused for a moment, placed his hands beneath his jaw, and continued to think about it. First of all, the path to creating Night Terror was a tough one. This is because he believes that its success is owed to the true name Singularity, which allowed his clone to exist as an independent being. Of course, they still shared his mind and needed his command to operate. They were bound to him either way, but have become a person of their own selves at the same time. Northern believed that a Singularity clone could begin to learn if allowed to stay out for too long. It would grow and slowly become an entity that can operate without his commands. It was an interesting thing to think about. Just think about wreaking havoc somewhere else without even being there. A wicked grin passed his lips. But just as it was fun, there were also downsides to it. What if the clone gained so much identity of self that it now wanted to live its life apart from its source? Northern doubted that would be possible, but still he couldn't rule out the fact that it can happen. Which was why he decided to instead focus on cultivating the Singularity for the main purpose of using them as raw material for other monsters. Since Void consumes the soul of every monster he killed, he figured that there would have been a couple of monsters' souls in Limitless Void. To confirm his thoughts, Northern decided to check for himself. He closed his eyes and dove in, opening them to the familial Hall of Darkness. There was no way he could ever get over the dark grandiose of his magnanimous hall. It was overwhelming. The arching high ceilings, the strange but beautiful carvings on them, the enormous pillars, so intimidating. They sprawled endlessly to every corner. The palace was so wide and big that there seemed to be no end to the pillars. No windows and ventilation in sight, but the air was still breathable and cool. I probably should consider hanging around here more, but I can't enter with my physical body. I wonder if this place is just a mental world or an actual physical world. It did say I can materialize it, though. But right now, where could it be? A couple of other curiosity questions about the limitless void jumped around Northern's head. He dismissed them and decided to do what he came for. He looked down on a panel that suddenly appeared the moment he thought about it. Call. Corpse Eater. Corpse Eater. Corpse Eater. Corpse Eater. Corpse Eater. Quite a lot of corpse eaters. Bulfer. 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 Just summon all of them. Immediately, his surroundings were submerged in a raging wall of black flames, dancing and reflecting on his face. It was an insurmountable amount of flames, one that caused his legs to stagger back a little and almost tremble. Even to his back, they spread and wiggled viciously like a serpentine river of destruction, hungry for every inch of space. Northern looked around in stunned silence, his mouth slightly opened. Then everywhere became dramatically darker. Thud, thud, thud. Light tremors ran through the glassy ground and into his bones as monsters with flaming black eyes began to march out of the flames. They were quite different from Night Terror and Call. Perhaps that was owed to the levels of their strength. The Corpse Eaters and Bulfers were, after all, inferior monsters compared to those two. Then, in the throng of monsters, Northern sighted a different one. Its eyes were holed in its slightly widener maw, and instead of its usual beady eyes, they burned like red flames of disaster. He could at once tell. A smile curled up on his lips as he saw that his neighbor was here too. Void really does consume the soul of every monster I kill. The fact once again settled deep within his mind. Northern heaved a great sigh and looked around. This was overwhelming. Chapter 213, Future Farmers of Talent Fragments. Where do I even start from? As far as logic went, these were all souls for now. He could summon his clones and decide to make each one of the souls dwell in his clones, but it was not a permanent thing. Once the clone died or returned, the soul also leaves and he'd have to summon and merge them again to achieve the same results. Honestly, that was a lot of hassle for him. But in order to permanently merge them, he needed to continually cultivate his cloning talent and wait. Am I not thinking about this the wrong way? Northern looked around intensively, then began to mutter to himself. The moment they become singularity, I won't gain talent fragments when they kill monsters since all that is going into soul fragments. On the other hand, if my clones become the monsters, they'd definitely be stronger and that would go a long way in farming talent fragments. The one thing Northern needed the most right now was a constant supply of talent fragments. He should hunt more and get more since that was his certified method of getting stronger without necessarily needing to rise in rank. With enough talent fragments, he could evolve the cloning talent even further than the second stage. He could also evolve Soul Eyes and see how far it can go. The more he grows, the more talent fragments he would need to grow. While the idea of having a couple of powerful and independent monsters was sweet, having an army of monsters to constantly farm talent fragments for him was a brilliant and reasonable idea. Or, at the very least, I should see what the multiple clone route can do. Northern had chosen the single clone route which gave birth to Dark Terror. Night Terror. He let out a deep sigh and looked around the horde of monsters. At the very least, I should add Call and that my neighbor over there to the list of void summons I have. From there, we can now begin to experiment. Hence came his objective. He really wanted to rank up, become a nomad and then a master as soon as he could. He felt like becoming a master would put him on a different league, of course. That feeling was owed to Raven's explanation. But he wanted to carefully do this. Since his soul was an impossible case phenomenon, moreover, with the variable that the power of chaos and void posed. A lot could change from just a single rank up. It was wise to work on making Call and the neighbor singularities and then he could rank up. After ranking up, he would then begin to work on creating a horde of monsters that would be farming talent fragments for him. He nodded with a satisfied look on his face. I think that's a good plan for now. Yes. Northern closed his eyes and opened them to the deep darkness, feeling a little numbness that barely lasted a second. Not much had changed since he left. Raven still seemed to be the same way and Terrence was still. He moved his head to observe her. Shivering. Time passed and passed. Later, Northern also sat down, thinking and sometimes observing how Raven just sat there, cross-legged like the statue of Buddha. Much later, he leaned against the stony wall of the cave and tried to sleep. It was uncomfortable. The stones of the wall kept poking his back in places that the leather breastplate weren't protecting. But he did manage to sleep. He does have a reputation for sleeping anyway after all. However, the sleep was not long. Soon he was up, staring into the distant light. All they were waiting for was that light to become dark. I'm sorry to ask, how long was I out for? Northern immediately turned his head to the left. Likewise Raven, who sharply opened her eyes. You're back, she said softly, then gracefully smiled at Terrence. Yes, I'm back. Light. Northern, baffled, asked. Back from where? Both of them turned to him. Raven was silent for a while. Then as she opened her mouth to speak, Terrence beat her to it. I go to places and experience a lot of things. The good part of it is that because of it I know a lot. And the bad part is that I also know a lot. Northern raised a brow. Knowing a lot can be quite harrowing, she added, then dropped her head with a somber expression. The darkness was silent for an awful while. Then a clap resounded and Terrence's voice followed. But I have you guys here. How bad can it be? She smiled and tilted her head to the side. Yeah. How bad can it be? Northern muttered. Then he looked away. Following that, Raven turned to Terrence and placed her hand gently on the oracle's head. Do you want to talk about it yet? Terrence shook her head, causing her white short hair to flutter around her head. Not yet. She paused and took note of their surroundings. I see we have made it to the cave. Having to cater while outrunning danger must have been quite annoying, she said, leaning her head a little to look past Raven and see Northern, who folded his arms and looked away. It wasn't quite, he retorted in an almost mumbling tone. Terrence smiled and looked at Raven. I hope you didn't do anything crazy this time around. Raven folded her arms, was silent for a few seconds, then said, I knocked out a couple of men and stripped them naked. You what? Northern and Terrence exclaimed simultaneously. Raven nonchalantly looked at Northern and looked at Raven, then she responded, with no iota of emotion in her voice. What? They have the clothes we need to blend in. Light, you can't just strip guys? Didn't you feel awkward doing it? She closed her eyes and replied with an indifferent face. What's there to feel awkward about? They are just men. Northern stared at her for a long while. Ah, crap. What the hell is this girl? I feel wronged. I feel so wrong. Chapter 214. Alas, night has come. A couple of hours passed. Silence ensued between them after the recent outrage over Raven's nonchalant attitude towards men, which even after all they said, she didn't find to be anything special. She didn't think she had done anything wrong and just thought they were exaggerating. After that, each one of them spent time in the abode of their thoughts. If one looked at it, they were strangers after all. It was not so weird that they found it quite difficult to talk to each other. And Northern wasn't particularly looking for anyone to talk to. He was way cool like this, thinking about his life, and the things that Raven had said. He lacks passion. What the hell does she even know? She doesn't even know me? Northern smacked his lips silently and frowned a little, glaring at the figure of a young lady, sitting with her legs crossed and her eyes closed. Terrence was sitting next to her, hugging her legs and throwing stones softly into the darkness to see how quickly they disappeared and how long-lasting the sound was. The sound could have been disturbing. Maybe it was. But Raven, who looked like she was meditating, didn't complain. Northern's thoughts were interrupted by it before. But what was he going to do? Tell her off? The wait was mind-tearing, incredibly boring. So it was quite understandable what she was doing. Even he dove into the limitless void a couple of times, would come out before he got too comfortable and forgot time. But alas, their long wait became over. Northern watched torturously as the light dimmed and faded into utter blackness. He looked at Raven, who was still silent. She refused to say anything. He turned his eyes to the entrance. The area where the hint of light was coming from was still slightly distinguishable from the darkness of the cave. Maybe she can still see. So he waited a couple of minutes more, closing his eyes and leaning his back on the wall while seated. They had been waiting for over 10 hours. Northern, I can't see. Northern opened his eyes and looked front. The darkness at this point was now indistinguishable. So she was waiting for when she wouldn't be able to see? Do you want me to summon a source of light? No. There are no guards around, but it's better safe than sorry. I don't know if you have noticed, the darkness around here is kind of difficult to penetrate. Northern raised his brows slightly. Wow! He was impressed. For someone that couldn't see in the dark, she had quite the keen perception. The only reason why he could tell was the unseeing eyes. Northern sighed. You are right. Stand up then. I'll lead us to the entrance. Thank you. She didn't need to, but she still did anyways. As she rose herself from the ground, Northern also did the same and went between the two of them. He looked down at Terence, who was standing beside him, and asked, "What about you?" "I don't know. Seeing in this darkness is tough, but I'm not totally blind like Light. Still, if you wouldn't consider it a bother, then I guess it's cool to have your help, if it wouldn't inconvenience you in any way." "It probably will," Northern inaudibly muttered away from her. He cleared his throat and answered well. "I'm fine, let's go." He grabbed her and Raven's wrists, then began to walk forward, through the darkness and soon, out of it. The sky was gray, very different from the blue velvety that hung above Lothelwyn, which was quite strange because they weren't that far from each other. After coming out of the cave, Northern slowly released both their hands, asking Raven specifically, "Can you see now?" "Yes, I can. But you do have nice hands. I thought I was mistaken. Slight calluses here and there, but it didn't seem like you've been training the sword or any weapon for long." Northern shuddered a little, a portion of his cheeks almost reddening. What the hell? Was that a compliment or an insult? What Light here meant was that, "You have nice hands." Terence shut her eyes and cocked her head towards Raven. "Young woman, if you would give compliments, you should really know how to give them right." Raven thought for a while and responded, "But I don't think it was a comply." Yeah. So where are we supposed to get these clothes you stripped from people?" She interrupted before Raven could complete her statement. Raven, not minding, just pointed to the left side of the cave. Then she went closer to it and bent down, easily lifting away a large stone she had used to cover the place. Northern narrowed his eyes for a while. For a girl, that's a lot of strength. He watched her bring out the stack of clothes and separate them. While watching her separate the clothes, a thought suddenly entered his mind. "Wait, you didn't kill these people, did you?" "No, I didn't," Raven responded curtly as she sorted out the last of the clothes and stood up. She looked at Northern as his voice resounded again. "Then what happened to them? Even if you knocked them out, I'm sure they would've." Northern paused, frowned, and looked at Terence, who went bug-eyed and vigorously shook her head. Ignoring her, he went on, Raven standing, indifferently before him. "What I mean to say is, they would definitely have woken up. You just knocked them out." Raven blinked for a couple of seconds and then looked down and muttered, "I see," her face becoming dark. At that point, Terence just turned away, mumbling, "I warned you. You see." Northern's hoarse tone subtly rose with a little harshness. She raised her head and stretched the clothes, which looked like a piece of rag to Northern. "Take your clothes first." Reluctantly, Northern moved his hand to collect the cloth. As his hands touched the cloth, Northern suddenly felt a mountainous movement. He wasn't looking up, but it looked like an entire mountain was about to move its hand and crush him beneath its massiveness. Hence, in that instance, he flew back in a blur, only to raise his eyes and see Raven's hand in the air, outstretched to grab. It had moved with such a maddening speed that smoke was oozing from her palms. She looked at her unoccupied hand, widening her eyes a little. "Wow, you saw that coming?" Northern frowned grimly. "Cut me the crap. What were you about to do now?" he yelled. She smiled with her lips and mouth, then tilted her head. "What else? I wanted to knock you out. Let's see if you'll wake up even after 10 hours. Chapter 215. Being a man is so hard. Ugh! Northern's hoarse voice rang out with an almost intimidating thickness. He grimaced at Raven. She had looked stunned for a second, but now she was smiling with her eyes. Then she said, "You see, Northern." A vein was almost popping out of her jaw. "When I say I knocked someone out, Northern, they cannot. It is impossible for them to wake up in just 10 hours. Perhaps you'd want to go over to the rock there to see how they are doing." She pointed to the far side of the cave, barreled and cornered by large rocks here and there. His eyes followed her hand and came back to her. His frown slowly relaxed, then he gulped and looked away. I think I'll pass." "Change then," Raven said and turned away. Immediately, her black armor began to shatter into white sparks of light. Took less than 3 seconds. Northern could see her entire back view. He swung his head away instantly, face burning red. What the hell? He wanted to scream at her, but suddenly remembered how absurd this was looking. Technically speaking, even though he didn't feel older than her or seem so, he was. The moment he had given his embarrassment a voice would have been the moment where he realized how much of a senile old fool he was being. Barely even thinking about it made him 1,000 times more embarrassed. But seriously though, what was the deal with the girl who randomly takes off their clothes in front of a guy? Aren't you going to change? Northern turned to look at Terence. A turmoil of hotness flushed his entire body the moment he laid eyes on her. She was naked. Northern, in an even faster swing, shot his eyes away, hurrying back into the cave away from them. Was it because it was dark? Did they think he wouldn't see that clearly? What exactly had left them to freely change in front of him? Meanwhile, Terence paused, blinking. Then she looked down at her chest. Her face went blank in that instant. He didn't see us, did he? A pale smile appeared on her face. No, that can't be. He shouldn't be able to see clearly to that extent. She was right, usually, it should take a source of light for anyone to even see anything in this pitch darkness, but not Northern. He could have been able to slightly see her hair due to its color. She could even see his and the dim glow of his eyes, which was why she was even more uncomfortable. Northern could really have seen them. The poor guy, in the darkness, dispelled his armor and wore the mundane one he was given. After a while, he walked out of the cave, putting on a blank face, one trying to be void of emotion. And since it was pretty dark, it was easy. You're done, let's go then, Raven said. Then they began to go further, passing a rocky scape. Soon, their environs began to change from the rocky scape to a terrain of low brown grasses. Northern looked at his clothes again. He had been looking at it since they started moving. Mundane was not the word for this. It was practically a rag. He looked down at himself again, examining the supposed leather armor and dismayed by its shoddy construction. The seams were uneven, resembling the erratic scribbles of a child's drawing rather than the precise stitches of a skilled artisan. Loose threads dangled like forgotten tendrils, betraying the haste with which it had been assembled. It was a testament to a rugged and inexperienced craftsmanship, each imperfection a battle scar in its own right. I'm quite shocked. He raised his head and looked at Raven. What those guys were donned with items instead of mundane armor. Raven retorted indifferently, walking. It makes no difference. A little difference maybe, since they'd have suffered more and my entire hands could be drenched in their blood. Northern's face froze, his legs also did. He watched Raven uncaredly walk forward. How can she be so vile? Quickly he took his steps and caught up. He spared one more glance at Raven and gulped. Man, I'm beginning to have thoughts. After a while of walking, they were now in what looked like a forest. But compared to the forest of Lothelowin, this one was dry, just a woodland. Its trees were titanic and eerily intimidating, especially since they looked like they were hanging down from the gray sky. They had no leaves or any sort, nothing to show for their years of growth, except for their pressuring heights. Northern looked up, as more of these trees began to sprawl into their views. It was really hard to tell how tall they went, even with his extraordinary eyes. It really was as though the trees hung down from the sky. Don't try to look at it too much. They'd infect your mind. Northern lowered his head and raised a brow at Raven. What do you mean they will infect my mind? She uttered to him nonchalantly. Haven't you seen or heard of mind attacks before? Northern grimaced a little. Yes, I have, but what does it have to do with this? They are trees. Yes, they are trees, but they are not ordinary trees, she continued as they walked. If you stare too much at the top, trying to discern the tip, you'll fall into its trap. She paused and added, Many have gone lost in this forest. It's a mystery, but Afghan and his generals think this tree might not just be a tree but host to a monster. Northern's expression paled. He focused on her and said, Host to a monster? How? How else? She paused and looked around. All these trees, Northern, it is highly possible that they have been infected by monsters, as many as them, or it could be a single monster. Northern's mouth fell. What the hell? Are you saying? Chapter 216, Apex Trees. Holy crap. Northern was beyond dazed. He knew monsters. He knew that they were versatile and could be anything. But he never knew that anything went this far. It can't be right. Northern's mind wavered. There was only one way to find out. His eyes glowed subtly as he used Soul Eyes. Several tabs, all depicting the same thing, appeared in front of his eyes, connected to the trees by white and barely visible linear strings. Profile. Common name, Blackwood. True name, Salvia inoxia. Soul rank, Maelstrom. Danger level, Apex. Attribute, Journey of the Lost Days. Talent. You cannot see this detail. Talent ability. You cannot see this detail. Northern paused for a moment. Everything about him halted as he took a look at the runes displaying the information of the trees before him. What is this? Something was definitely wrong. First of all, I know salvia. Salvia is a type of tree that is used in treating green veins. All one had to do was cut its bark and soak it inside warm water, then drink. And green vein was a situation when one experienced a reverse flow during absorption of essence from soul cores. It could be caused by many things, sudden and dangerous interruptions, or even breathing and technique mistakes during absorption. It used to be a big deal back in the days, but mundane healers were able to find a solution to this through Salvia inoxia, of course. This further proved that both non-drifters and drifters had contributed to the universal society and progression of the world as a whole, regardless of the continent. Northern, of course, knew all of this due to his mother. Although not a mundane healer, she was very vast in the knowledge of herbs and had practically taught him all there is to know about it. At the age of 5, Northern was already handling poisonous herbs and telling each and every single one of them apart. He knew what to do to stop bleeding, what herb to use in place of CPR, or the one to use when someone is having a seizure. He knew a lot, but of course, as much as he knew a lot of herbs, there were also a lot more he had not known. Not because he wasn't taught, but because he had not met them. There were, after all, almost an unlimited amount of trees and plants out there, especially with the constant newness of everything that rifts brought. His mother had specifically said all of that. Particularly, this Blackwood was a well-known one. And there is no way that it should have a talent, ability, or even attribute. Northern couldn't make sense of what he was seeing at all. Something was disturbingly wrong. Raven and Terence stopped and turned back to him. "Is something wrong, Mr. Northern?" Terence softly asked. He lingered for a moment. Then he turned his eyes directly to Raven and with a slightly trembling voice, asked, "Raven, I have a question." Raven squinted her eyes a little and nodded. "Go ahead." Northern, even after she had said that, took a while to make another sound. The tremor in his voice was becoming more palpable, as his mind fully realized the magnitude of what could be happening in this place. When you say it could be a horde of monsters, or it could be one, if the soul rank of the monster is a maelstrom, and the danger level is apex, is it possible that we are surrounded by a forest of incredibly strong monsters, the strongest I have seen so far? Raven was silent for a while. He could tell she was deeply thinking about his question. Terence shared glances between the both of them, looking a little bit lost at the same time, waiting for Raven's reply as much as Northern was. Raven then looked at Northern, lingered, then responded, "I guess we could say that. That would mean that we are surrounded by a lot of maelstrom rank monsters of the apex danger level." Northern felt his heart drop, his legs weakened. This made no sense. They weren't even in the rift. Before he could go any further with his terrorized thoughts, though, Raven's silvery voice cut through. "But that will make no sense." Northern looked at her. "And why is your reason for that?" "Well, it's common sense, Northern. First of all, this is not a rift. Even if it is, there is an order to the ecosystem of monsters in a rift, and it's like an inherent enactment in the head of monsters to follow and obey the hierarchy of that ecosystem. However, because of the differences in danger levels of monsters, a very versatile variability is introduced. This means a monster that puts disruption to that very ecosystem can arise. Most likely this situation begins from the calamity level. Because of this, monsters of the same rank but lower danger level are bound to enter an intense internal fight as an adaptation mechanism. Same thing with monsters of higher ranks. They begin to want to eliminate this threat, or better still, even out the variability by breeding a lot of equally strong monsters as this variable who are obedient to the hierarchy. Raven looked at Northern and continued, "Now, Northern, think about a vast number of monsters of the apex. The apex, peak of the peak, level of monsters, maelstrom for that rank, all dwelling in a place like this." Northern was silent. He looked down for a moment and looked at Raven. Then he answered, "That will mean riot. Each monster would be out for each other as a means of adaptation, I guess?" Raven nodded and added, "Since they are all apex have a behavioral pattern of leadership, reigning supreme wherever they are, the rank does not matter. An apex-level fiend rank would want to go against an apex-level infernal rank monster because of the nature they have." She looked around once more and said, "If a horde of monsters is residing in these woods, then it would have been a total disaster. No one would be alive in Sloria Stronghold." "You are right." Northern looked down a bit. Raven studied him for a moment and then opened her mouth. "I'm quite shocked. Didn't you receive basic knowledge for all these things? I thought you attended a citadel since you know Master Annette, Sage Gilbert, and the Hidden Daggers." Chapter 217. A smart and dangerous young lady. Northern raised a brow. Hidden Daggers? It's an infamous name for the twins back in the Central Plains. I see. They were infamous. I did think them to be dangerous. Northern sighed and said to Raven, "I didn't go to any citadel. I met Ruffsburg the day I went for my talent evaluation test. And the next 2 days I was in the academy a couple of minutes later in the rift. My parents didn't really teach me anything about rifts. The plan was that I would learn all that needed to be learned in the academy." His voice grew somber for a bit. "I wonder if they know I'm not in the academy right now. My mother must be so worried. My father too. He might be a crackhead, but he's an amazing man." Northern raised his head, only to see Raven's eyes widened. Terence was wiping a tear away from her eyes. "That was so touching. Oh, bless all. You have a story to tell too." He tilted his head back and frowned in irritation. "What the hell?" Then he turned to Raven, his frown becoming dark and grim. "What?" Raven was silent first. She hesitated, then stuttered as she asked, "Wait, so you are saying you had no prior knowledge about anything regarding the rift or monsters or even anything? You didn't go to a citadel? Didn't have private tutors such as masters or sages train you in basic combat and prepare you for your first walking?" Northern shook his head. "I had none of that. But I trained my body a lot with my father, so yes, I can move the way I want to move, and I have seen him hunt a couple of times, so I have these ideas of how to stab and where to stab." Raven staggered back a little, shaking her head. No, this and that are two different matters, Northern." She paused, breathed, and continued. "You are telling me that you went into a rift, survived in it alone, and you had no prior knowledge or anything about how to survive in a rift?" Northern cluelessly shook his head. "No, I didn't." He looked at her. The young menacing lady was almost breaking apart from shock. "I know it's that bad. Can you stop being dramatic about it?" "No, Northern, you don't understand. You can't survive in a rift without being taught how to. It makes no sense. You should have died a long time ago." Northern's brows curved deeply. "Is that a curse?" "No, I'm not cursing you. I am just stating the facts because that's how it's supposed to be. To make things worse, it was a Tier V rift. Even a group of 3 drifters, 2 nomads and 1 master, will find it incredibly hard to overcome a Tier V rift. Only luck can help them. That level of rift is meant for a savant or sage, and you were able to do it as a walker." Northern looked away and scratched the back of his head with a smug grin. "Well, it wasn't that easy for me either." The next part, however, not even him expected it. "And you come out of it acting like a wuss? Northern, you should be the strongest person not just in our stronghold but in this continent right now. Why does it look like you're the weakest?" Northern felt a sharp arrow of words pierce through his heart. He almost fell to his knees because of how harrowing the pain was. Grimacing, he glared at Raven. What the hell? Was all that drama just to insult me? Raven shook her head. Her face was dead serious, and her voice now calm as compared to the little raise from before. I was not insulting you. I'm just stating the facts. Yeah, sure, you bastard, he muttered the latter part. Raven shook her head, laying a pitiful gaze on him, and looked at the trees. Anyway, my words about it being a group or one was to throw you off. I wanted to check something, and it seems I confirmed it. Northern narrowed his eyes. You wanted to check something. What? Raven smiled. Do you get it now that this forest is being infested by just one monster, right? An incredibly dangerous one at that. An apex-level maelstrom. Northern nodded. Yes, you are right. The smile on her face grew a little bit wider. What? Northern inquired arrogantly. Those weird smiles of hers were beginning to piss him off. Her cheeks puffed as she smiled sincerely wider. Her eyes were on Northern for a while before she then spoke. Her voice crept coldly, almost filling the entire atmosphere with a frightening frigidity. You, Northern, you can see the ranks and danger levels of monsters, can't you? You have a scout-type ability, don't you? Her questions struck Northern viciously. His heartbeat thumped super fast for a couple of seconds. Did he just get played into revealing his talent ability? This bastard. Northern's mind went back to the beginning. Raven had deliberately told him that a horde of monsters were probably hiding within each tree, or one monster was using all the trees as hosts, expecting that if he had a scouting ability, he would try to find out more. If Northern had kept quiet, she would have probably guessed that he didn't. But he pressed the conversation only because before Soul Eyes, all the trees appeared as Maelstrom rank, which caused him to freak out. He wasn't expecting this at all. He was completely played. And the most annoying thing was, Northern frowned. It seemed to not have been once but twice. In the darkness, Northern couldn't help but feel that Raven just used the situation to find out if he had an ability relating to his eyes, which meant that she had been planning this out from the beginning, because it made no sense as to why she suddenly wanted to find out if he had a scouting-type ability, except if she was driving towards something else. Northern's eyes narrowed to a slit. He glared at her. Cut me the crap. What are you trying to do here? Is this what you brought me for? To unravel my secrets. Chapter 218. Amazing Raven of the Kageyama clan. Northern was incredibly pissed at himself. To think that he was just slightly beginning to think otherwise of Raven. But now he felt like it was just her manipulative ways of making him relaxed. A tense silence hung in between the two of them for a moment. They were still in the dry wood, standing opposite each other, Northern glaring and Raven smiling coldly. Cut to the chase, will you? Raven lingered for a few moments before she started. Ellis Ruthsworn has a wonderful ability. I kept him out of all parties because of it. That guy is a gem that will be a crucial part of the Army of the End. Northern's grimace only turned darker with every word that came out of her mouth. He tilted his head a little bit. What? Army of the End? What the hell is that? Raven looked up and smiled. It's the army I am creating. The one that will fight the rest of the Rift, fight Sloria, and return Stelia to its former glory. Northern's face grew pale with irritation. It's all these nonsense hero crap again. Only that now she seemed twisted. Raven suddenly clenched her neck, coughing and leaning on her knees. She coughed painfully a couple more times, such that Northern became a little bit worried. Then, with a hoarse voice, she said hurriedly, Terrence, I think I am under attack. Northern also heard it clearly. He looked at Terrence, who stood shocked, her eyes widened. She looked up and narrowed her eyes, then looked at Northern, then said with a trembling voice, Mr. Northern, this is bad. This is really, really bad. Eh? Do these guys think I'm a kindergartner? She's going to trick me all over again. Raven stood upright and steadily breathed. Then she looked seriously at Northern. As Northern stared back, he could now notice a deep and eerie emptiness in her crimson eyes. Before, her eyes were cold but full of purpose and confidence. Now they were almost looking lifeless. As much as he didn't want to admit it, his instincts told him The delusional hero was currently under a mind attack. But what sort of crazy mind attack is this? What purpose did it serve to achieve? If there's anything he knows and is sure of, it's that everything Raven had spat was incredibly true. And indeed she was driving to a point. Raven smiled and continued like a robot. With Ellis' ability to see the ranks of monsters, we will most likely have an easier battle. We will have enough insight to plan and prepare fully for the battle. Yes, that was why I kept Ellis from the eyes of anyone and didn't tell him, even after discovering what his abilities were. She lingered, then looked at Northern fiercely. Her eyes were becoming dangerous, but that smile still stayed plastered to her face. But you, there's something special about you. If you are able to use Ellis' ability, after only meeting Ellis. You also spoke of Ellis being a true gem in the meeting. Raven suddenly frowned and grabbed her own neck, clenching it tightly. Her palms began to emit white light, one that burned viciously into her neck, causing vapor to seep out. Terrence, seeing Raven's desperate attempt to burn her own throat, suddenly dashed forward and grabbed Raven's hand. She tried to pull it away, but the hand didn't budge a bit. She strained and struggled with it, but nothing was happening, except the rising pitch of her strained groaning and the hissing sound of light burning Raven's skin and slowly searing further. A little help here. Would you like this crazy girl to burn her own throat? She shouted back at Northern. Northern stood dazed for a moment. Amazing! Damn! She's amazing! He could relate to how mind attacks work because he had been a victim of one himself, although he didn't know Call's danger level, but he was sure it wasn't Apex. He was very sure. So Call's mind attack on him was probably inferior to this one. Took time to happen, and he slowly sank into it without realizing. But this one seemed to have kicked in immediately when Raven started looking up into the trees, which meant she was totally weak against mind attacks, unlike him who now had a resistance to it, not just his gloves because they weren't even on at this moment. However, what amazed Northern was the way Raven was able to jolt herself to reality to make them both know that she was under a mind attack, Terrence in particular. And now, her body was completely moving on its own, frighteningly resolved to burn her throat if it meant she stopped talking. She was a crazy being, very crazy, but I can't let her burn her throat. I, after all, have to hear all of that to the very end. Those were probably her secrets, something she didn't tell anyone, and something that had a lot of things to do with Northern. That would most likely mean that the mind attack forced one to reveal their deepest, darkest secrets in relation to a person. Northern was not sure, but regardless, he had to help. He shot forward in a flash and stopped abruptly in front of Raven, exhibiting her perfect and envious control of halting that made even Raven's eyes widen for a bit. "Leave her!" he shouted immediately, and Terrence responded, jumping away as quick as she could. Then Northern powerfully clenched his fist and exhaled steamy breath from his mouth. "Tess, this is for tricking me." He launched a blow directly into her belly, causing her to fold like a piece of paper, cough out spit, and instinctively remove her hand to hold her pained stomach as she flew away. But Raven quickly converted the whole momentum to roll in the air and land on her feet, staggering back a little and falling to one knee. She clenched her teeth. No doubt about it, that punch hurt. A part of her lips curled up, then she hurriedly stood up. Northern readied himself for another punch as she did. However, instead of running towards him, Raven turned around and threw her head over her shoulder. "I'll be leaving first." Then she dashed away, disappearing into the invisible embrace of the wind. Northern was struck dumbfounded. "Eh?" Terrence smiled awkwardly. "Ah, looks like she ran away. But that means your punch actually managed to knock her back to her senses. Yay!" Chapter 219, A Fallen Star. Northern still couldn't believe it, even as he and Terrence trekked out of the woods. Light has an overwhelming vulnerability to mind attacks. For a hero, that's quite ironic. Terrence chuckled. "I know, right? Light, she is just like every other person. She's just smarter, crazy, passionate, and good, very good." Northern studied her for a bit. "You are sounding like you idolize her." The Oracle smiled gleefully. "I don't care. I am her #1 fan. They were silent as they walked. Then, after a dozen seconds, Northern said, You are from this continent, aren't you? Yes, Terence responded. Even though you're probably our age, that's interesting. And you are a priestess at such a young age. Terence raised a brow. I'm not sure what you mean by, at such a young age. I know it's not much, but I'm pretty sure it's not what you call such a young age. Northern frowned curiously. Wait, how old are you? If it's all right for me to ask. I'm 21, what about you? She asked, looking at him. Northern's mouth opened, but no words came out. 21. Damn. I'm 15. Well, I did die at 25, so technically, 25 plus 15 is 40. Yeah, I'm older than her, but 40 is too far. Since you are so silent about it, I'm guessing you are very young. Let's see, since you are one of the people that accidentally came here with Raven, you are probably around 15 or 16. She paused and studied his face keenly as they walked, scrunching up her eyes. Then she nodded her head. Yes, I'll go for 15. You're definitely 15. Northern let out a galloping laugh. What makes you so sure? Terence smiled and tilted her head to the side, just like a vixen would do to ensnare her targets. The fact that you just stuttered makes me so sure. Northern looked at her for a while. This was probably the longest he had ever looked at her. And now he realized, she actually looks old. Terence acted like a child, had a very small stature and lean frame. She had a babyish face too and short white hair. So it was really hard to see the hint of adulthood that reflected in her eyes. Except one stared deeply like Northern just did. Truly realizing the vast difference in their age made Northern drown in embarrassment for how he had looked at her till now. He turned away for a moment to hide his shame as they continued to walk in silence again. After a dozen minutes or so, they were out of the forest. And far ahead, sprawled out a somber, decaying scenery. Shades of brown filled the opposite sides, the foliage withered and decaying, casting an air of melancholy over the surroundings. The cobblestone path was overgrown with weeds and withered vines. The stones cracked and displaced, a testament to the passage of time. Leaves and debris littered the ground, creating a carpet of decay that crunched underfoot. Ahead, a once grand torii gate stood as a skeletal remnant of its former glory. Its once sturdy wooden beams had succumbed to the relentless effects of weathering, splintered and rotting. Their vibrant red paint long since faded to a dull, lifeless hue. The gate's imposing size and intricate carvings, now obscured by moss and lichen, hinted at its former magnificence, but the ravages of time had left it a decaying behemoth, a haunting reminder of the impermanence of all things. The cold moonlight cast a subtle light that managed to chase stark shadows to the corners. But still, an impregnable darkness accentuated the gate's dilapidated state and the eerie stillness that permeated the scene. In the center of this scenery stood a young lady in rags for an attire. Despite her uncomely look, she stood like a fallen star beneath the weak glow of the moonlights. Quite imposing, and strangely beautiful. Looking at the lady, Northern was tempted to call her that. But it was not also hard to look at her with bitterness and scorn. She had played him, after all. As they walked closer to the scene, Terence's voice rolled out. I don't know if this is going to help in any way, Mr. Northern. She paused her steps. Northern also did the same and looked at her. Yes. Light did not trick you in any way. Of course, she has plans of her own, which she's not obligated to tell you or anyone, just like you two have plans of your own which you are not obligated to tell anyone. You also have to understand. She's smart, incredibly whimsical, and very, very perceptive. You'd be shocked as to how much she pays attention to details. So the things she said, those things she knew about you, weren't because she was trying to trick you somehow. She's just that smart. And I think it was her deepest secret because she didn't want to say it to you and hurt you. Northern was silent. He looked around and brought his face back to Terence. Then he asked, How are you resistant to mind attacks? Terence was a bit taken aback by the question. To be honest, it wasn't what she was expecting. She allowed a small smile and answered, What do you expect? You said it yourself. I am a priestess. She walked forward but stopped and added, "Besides, with the kind of places I go to in my trances, it's inevitable that I have an indomitable mental fortitude." Northern nodded slowly. "I see." Terence smiled and walked away, and he watched her meet Raven. He stayed on his own for a couple of seconds before he walked forward. "It's not like that changes the fact that she might know that I have the ability to copy talents. If worst comes to worst, what would he do?" He had never thought about it because he never knew that someone would discover his ability. The world knowing that he could copy more than one talent and even turn it permanently to his own after ranking up was a big deal. He had never thought about what the consequences would be, but he knew they were going to be dire. Northern gritted his teeth and exhaled. "I'll deal with things one by one. For now, let's just focus on stealing the goddamn map from that sage." Chapter 220, Raven is Crazy. They entered the gate and proceeded through the decayed bush, in silence. But this time, the silence was very devastating. Because obviously there was tension between Raven and Northern, and none of them was saying anything about it. Terence seemed to be the only one suffering as a result of the tension. She wanted to just scream several times, but she just looked at both of them and smiled. She could easily tell that this was probably something they needed to sort out themselves. Whatever would flow out of it needed to flow out, for both their sakes and most especially for Raven. Because deep down, Terence felt she was also stupid and needed to grow up. But Raven was tremendously egotistic. The crazy part was she didn't even see herself as such. The things she did, her crazy way of handling people sometimes seemed like control, but she didn't see it as that. To her, she was just genuinely helping them to see their potential. Everyone had misunderstood her in the beginning, but now everyone had come to respect her, because her true intent was only what mattered in the end. Still, Terence felt it was time for Raven to start being more conscious about her character. She knew nothing at all. Nothing. And sometimes she too could be naive. All she needed to get played was someone way smarter and stronger than her. Terence was sure Raven would get played without even realizing it. She was a genius through and through, but she was a clueless one. Finally, after millennia of silence, Northern spoke. "I thought that we should have started seeing people by now." "No, we can't. This place is a backdoor for a reason." "Why? Why aren't there people?" Raven pointed over her shoulder with her thumb. "Isn't it obvious?" Her tone annoyed Northern, but he put up with it and glanced back. "The woods. That makes a lot of sense." Saying that suddenly made him realize something yet again. "Wait, Raven." Raven looked away quickly, like a dog that had been caught guilty. Northern scowled at her. "You knew. You knew about the woods. You knew what it was going to do, and you knew that you were going to be heavily affected by it." Raven turned to him slowly and sighed. Her face, of course, was still blank, devoid of any reasonable emotion, as if nothing mattered to her. "There was no other way," she said. "No other way? Why the hell would you jeopardize yourself like that?" Raven's eyes became dour. She looked down briefly and looked at Northern, flames of conviction igniting deep within her eyes. They were frightening. "I didn't expect that my deepest secret was going to be that. It wasn't really a secret. I was just skeptical of you finding out, since that would ruin a lot of things in my plan. But since when do you care about what I do to get to my goal? Whether I put myself at jeopardy or not is not your business." Northern stepped closer and stopped barely 2 feet away from her, glaring into her eyes. "Look, lady, I don't care what you do to yourself, but you are not the only one on this journey. You are not the only person whose life is at jeopardy. So stop haggling our lives with death," he yelled, almost groaning. His brows were tightly furrowed, and eyes gleaming. Northern was really angry. What if I didn't have resistance to mind attacks? What if I couldn't see in the darkness any more than an ordinary person should? What if it was all of that? What would you have done? He panted with his chest rising and falling. Northern, at this point, stuttered as his voice angrily rang. How? J. Just how? How can you trust someone you don't even know enough to bargain your life on them? It makes no freaking sense. Northern shouted, throwing his hands. He was right. It made absolutely no sense. Raven completely trusted him, like she was so sure that he'd overcome those things. Was it because she knew something about him? Even if she knew his talents and that he could do it, it still made no sense that she would place her entire life and plans in his hands. Just like that, without even discussing it with him. Northern grabbed his head. Thinking about it was almost harrowing. Crap. It's barely even been a day since we started this journey, and I feel like it's been a year already. If all this could happen just in one day, what awaited him in the future? Northern was sure he would be mentally dead before he came, because none of this girl's actions and thought patterns made any sense. It didn't make any sense at all. Crap. Crap. Northern. Raven tried to call softly, but Northern was still in his head. Crap. 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 Northern. What? He screamed back to reality. What is it? Raven swallowed her spit. You're shouting, we are very close to the back of the stronghold, and Helena's abode is located there. If you keep shouting like that, it will only be a matter of time before she catches on to us, and our plan goes up in flames. She sternly made her point, even glaring at Northern. After hearing her, Northern recomposed himself and sighed deeply. I apologize for my behavior just now. I'm sorry, but I have one more question. Now that you mention it, remember you said we are here to do two things. Yes, Northern. Yes, 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 the person I owe a death grudge to is Afcon, and I will kill him before leaving this place. Northern's mouth fell. This time, even Terrence turned her head to look at Raven with a stunned surprise. No, Light, you don't mean that. Afcon. She looked at the oracle. Yes, I do, Terrence. Then she turned her eyes to Northern. They were burning with a ferocious amount of conviction. One could tell by the look in her eyes that nothing on this trial could make her think otherwise. She opened her mouth, looking right into Northern's face as she spoke. Do you know that Afcon and Helena are what's left of the first generation of students that was sent here 10 years ago? Northern's brows furrowed. What?